Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Melissa Bolton, and I'm here today representing the Centre for the Study of Students in Post-Secondary Education at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. My presentation here today pertains to our nationwide research venture pertaining to debt load and financial barriers for students with disabilities in Canadian post-secondary education. I'm experiencing technical difficulties. Okay. All right. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to acknowledge and thank our partners in this study, the National Education, sorry. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Everything's resolved. I would like to thank the National Educational Association of Disabled Students, NEADS, with a special thanks to Dr. Mahadio Suke for all of his great support. Additionally, I would like to thank our funders, the Canada Millennium Scholarship Foundation and the Higher Education Council of Ontario, HECO. Additionally, I would like to thank the Canadian Association of Disability Service Providers in Post-Secondary Education, CADSP. This research is directed, supported, and guided by Dr. Tony Chambers at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. Just to give you a little overview of my presentation today, I'm first going to be speaking to the purpose of this study, before also talking about the 4 phases of research. Then I'll be speaking a little bit to the methodology we used, and then I'm going to reveal some of the preliminary analyses and findings that we have found so far in our study. Purpose. The purpose of the study was to assess the academic and educational debt load and financial barriers for students with disabilities in Canadian post-secondary education. The goal is to understand the relative debt incurred by students with disabilities, the financial barriers that they face, and the impact that this debt has on their educational experiences and decisions. It's important to note that students with disabilities incur the second highest amount of documented debt associated with attending post-secondary education in Canada of any student group. Despite this finding, data available on student debt load currently is very limited, especially in the information distinguishing the types of debt experienced. That's where we come in. The phases of research. This is a very large-scale national research venture, and it's broken down into 4 major phases. Phase 1 includes interviews with key informants, students who identify as having a disability in Canadian post-secondary education. There will be 60 of these interviews conducted prospectively. Phase 2 includes interviews with financial aid offices and disability service providers across Canada. Phase 3 involves a pan-Canadian online survey of students with disabilities in colleges and universities. And finally, Phase 4 involves quantitative analysis of National Archive data sets put forth in an effort by the Data Liberation Initiative through Statistics Canada. With all of that being said, given the time constraints of the presentation today, I am going to be speaking to Phase 1 of this research project. So today I'm going to be presenting some of the preliminary analyses from the key informant interviews with disabled students in Canadian post-secondary education. We conducted telephone interviews with students that lasted approximately 45 minutes in length and covered a breadth of topics pertaining to debt load and financial barriers, including enrollment status, field of study, financial supports, level of debt incurred thus far, level of debt that is expected to incurred by the end of graduation, type of disability, expenditure questions, housing situation, employment status, whether or not they're also attaining part-time employment to supplement the costs of university or college, aspirations post-graduation, and access to resources. As you can note, we tried to hit on many different topics pertaining to financial barriers to provide a holistic view of what barriers students are facing. the preliminary analyses. The preliminary analyses is based upon 20% of the total interviews. As one of the primary researchers, in my professional experience, or my professional opinion, this sample is reflective of the participants on whole within the study. So before I reveal a little bit of the preliminary analyses, I just want to speak a little bit to the methodology. The transcriptions obtained from the interviews were analyzed using grounded theory. And grounded theory is a measure of constant comparison that is widely used and validated within qualitative research. From this, the data is analyzed for common and divergent themes. Incrementally, theories can be built. So here's what we found. So some of the financial barriers encountered during studies, one of the major ones identified by the majority of students was qualifying for external funding. For example, OSAP qualifications. Many students felt that there were often competing or contradictory or stringent qualifications standards for many different funding agencies, and this posed as a large financial barrier. Along those lines, students also noted a limited number of bursaries, grants, and awards for students with disabilities. We asked students how they were coping with these financial barriers and what kind of things they were trying to do to overcome these financial concerns. Many students noted having to attend school part-time and then obtaining part-time employment to supplement the costs of their post-secondary degree. We asked students, what are your major sources of debt? Now, this is probably not going to be surprising to many of you, but tuition played a large role. Additionally, educational equipment such as laptops, specialized software, educational tools needed to navigate through post-secondary degree also posed hefty financial concerns. Additionally, student loans and credit cards were also sources of debt. We asked students what individuals or organizations are involved in helping them overcome these financial barriers. Five major resources were identified. Financial aid offices at the individual institution, college or university, disability service providers at the individual college or university, provincial disability support programs, for example, the Ontario Disability Service Program, family members. Many students noted that either friends, parents, partners were providing them with loans to help supplement the cost of their post-secondary education. As well, interestingly, community centers and religious groups affiliated with the student often stepped in to help provide funding where they could. Over and above the individual sources of debt, we wanted to know the impact of how their financial barriers were impacting their student experience on whole. So we asked students, how does financial barriers either hinder or facilitate your post-secondary educational experience? Unanimously, students said that the financial barriers acted as a hindrance on their experience at colleges or universities. Over and above the normal stress generally associated with post-secondary degrees, many students noted that financial barriers was a constant stressor in their life. Interestingly, students noted that it also provided restriction and limitation on their level of social engagement within the college or university. Students were feeling very isolated and frustrated because they couldn't afford to participate in many of the extracurricular social engagement with other groups within the university. And this was a major concern. There was a disconnect between students and their level of feeling as they were a part of the community within the college or university because they could not afford to engage in these social events. And I think that's an important piece because we often fail to talk about the social engagement when talking about the experience of being a college or university student and talking about barriers. This is something that needs to be addressed, in my opinion. We asked students what their educational and employment aspirations were after graduation. Understandably, many students noted that they wanted to obtain jobs related to their field of study and really make use of that degree that they've worked so hard to attain. Interestingly, the majority of the students place a very high value on education. This was reflected not only in their current pursuits in their post-secondary education, but also in their aspirations for the future. Despite the seemingly large financial barriers that they faced and the relative debt incurred thus far, students noted that they actually planned to go on to further education despite these barriers, and decided that they'd like to pursue aspirations towards graduate school. And I think this was a very interesting finding. Additionally, many students noted that they would like to obtain jobs in helping professions and become advocates for other students with disabilities. This included occupations such as social work, counseling, etc. Finally, we asked students for feedback. What do you think that we as researchers need to know about students with disabilities in Canadian post-secondary education? What do you think is important, and what are we missing? When we asked students, is there anything else you'd like to comment on regarding your educational debt load and financial barriers? The majority of students noted concern with the system at large. Many said that they really hoped for systemic changes in policy and funding. Furthermore, they said that the process of trying to obtain funding was often an exhaustive one. Students felt they had to go to A and B and C and D just to obtain enough funding to piece together, to have enough funding to navigate through their post-secondary degree. And this process was often a very frustrating one. Understandably, students noted that they would like a greater access to resources. Finally, and I think in my opinion most importantly, students noted that they want to have a voice in the policies that affect them. There was a large disconnect between students, the power that students felt that they had, and then the policies that actually affected them. It was not uncommon at the end of an interview to hear a student say, "Thank you for listening. I appreciate being able to tell my story." And I think that this is something that we as researchers really need to consider. This is an ongoing project, so for more information, please contact us at the Center for the Study of Students in Post-Secondary Education. And I'd also like to take a moment for a shameless plug. We're still recruiting participants currently, so if anybody is interested in this project or being involved, please come see me later and we'll exchange contact information. Thank you for listening to me today, and I welcome any questions in the Q&A.